everyone. My name is Joe Lasley, and I am here to talk about leadership and role-playing games, and specifically role-playing games as leadership practice. I am an assistant professor at the University of Southern Maine, and I also do some consulting on game-based leadership. So I'm going to start with a story. Once upon a time, there was a coastal town called Green Hills Landing. It was ruled by a benevolent lineage of storm guard lords. Under their rule, the land and people prospered until one day when the Grey Castle Lord staged a coup and succeeded in taking control of the city for their own selfish ends. The Grey Castle's rule was not the benevolent style of leadership exhibited by the former rulers. And Marcis, a young girl at the time, was the only storm guard to escape and spent years honing her skills as a rogue assassin. She met a group of other adventurers, and they grew together through completing epic quests. The group supported Marcis in achieving her goals to exact revenge against the Grey Castle Lord and to emancipate the town of Green Hills Landing. They embarked on this quest together, as they had several times before for other members. The tyrannical system must be deconstructed and overthrown. After sneaking into the keep and dispatching of Lord Grey Castle after all these years, Marcis faced a Grey Castle child named Sigibald, who was now in a position she remembered from that fateful night many years prior. With the Lord dispatched, a power vacuum, and a child heir, the group is faced with the ethical dilemmas about what to do with the child and the commitment to reinstall a democratic government in Green Hills Landing. What would you do? And better yet, how do you really think it would go? This story is from a game of Dungeons and Dragons that was improvised by a group of friends in an original setting. The particular plot is a mirror to the player's motivations and even the organizational context of one of the players' lives. Seeking democracy in leadership and justice in social systems was a shared sentiment in this group of players. And this player in particular was an executive level leader in a nonprofit organization at the time and regularly grappled with the burdens of leadership at that level. In order to maintain and manage an organizational system, she often had to be that system rather than tearing it down. It comes as no surprise that being free of those responsibilities and character was an opportunity for catharsis, and further to act out the complex dynamics of breaking old traditions and negotiating a restorative solution in Green Hills Landing, following the removal of Lord Grey Castle. These are but a few examples of how role-playing games provide opportunities that can be used for personally meaningful role-play and enacting complex social and ethical dilemmas that are ripe for leadership learning. And so I'm going to talk about a few different ways that we do leader and leadership practice, development, and learning, and mention how role-playing games can fit into some of these activities. First is that leadership is about doing and being. Of course, this follows the thinking and feeling elements of learning, but leadership doesn't really matter if you go to a workshop and feel inspired and then that's it. It needs to be experiential and use action learning, which of course, role-playing games are experiential. The other differential that I want to make is between leader and leadership. When we talk about leader development, a lot of people use the term leadership, but what they're really talking about is an individual's growth and development. That individual is learning more about themselves, identifying as a leader, behaving as a leader, and exercising leadership behaviors. Leadership is more of an activity or process that happens in a group. It involves change and creativity and shifting cultures. So leader and leadership development are both important, of course, and we need to differentiate because role-playing games can be used for both. When we talk about leader development, I want to differentiate further between horizontal and vertical development. In horizontal development, leaders are practicing skills and knowing their personality better. This doesn't involve a fundamental change in who they are as a person or how they operate. But it involves things like that are also present in role-playing games, like problem-solving skills, communication skills, understanding different roles on the team and how they fit into that. And so those are some of the skills that can be practiced in a role-playing game setting as well, that are also leadership skills. Vertical development is more about changing our sense of self and elevating how we understand the world to include more possibilities and the complexity of the world around us, and understanding the world from more perspectives and from a higher level, in a sense. And this is a fundamental change in identity and in the way in which identity is constructed for an individual. And this, of course, is also possible in the identity development that is fitting in role-playing games as well, to do some deeper work around bleed and steering and different elements of archetypes. That type of work would be vertical leader development. Of course, for leadership, teams learn too. And we know teams learn because they can exceed the sum of the individuals. And when teams do this, we know that they have learned to do this, actually. So when teams are learning, individuals are learning as well, of course. That is definitely part of it. But teams can learn. And so there are processes, team processes like dialogue, thinking together, patterns of interaction, and group dynamics. These are things that develop and teams can learn. And these are also things that can be done in a role-playing group. In role-playing, we have a shared imagination or sense of narrative that can lead us, as we practice, to become more of thinking together and having shared mental models. And also patterns of interaction. Role-playing groups, just like any other groups, can develop a culture of psychological safety and interactions that support the regular innovation, disruption, and repair processes in teams and groups. And so these can be guided in role-playing games experiences as a way of practicing and developing capacity for doing them amongst intact teams or individuals that are parts of other teams. And one of the perspectives on leadership that makes the connection, in my mind, so interesting and fitting is how Burns describes in Transforming Leadership that leadership is a process in which people become co-designers of their own experiences, both as individuals and in teams. And this is a cornerstone of RPG narratives as well. So the potential for both collaborative and collective creativity to become agents of our own experience is leadership, and is a way of using and playing RPGs, especially when the more narrative focus is involved. I'm going to talk a little bit too about the difference between practicing and practice. Practicing is when you do a skill over and over again to get better at it. Practice is a way of doing work or a way of being, a craft, to have a practice. As opposed to practice. And both are involved in leadership learning. But leadership as practice versus practicing has some principles for how to learn leadership as a practice. One is to review and renew the leadership concept held by the learners in their organizations. And role-playing games provide an opportunity to see concepts in a different light because we have the narrative agency to enact things the way that we think they would go, and then to imagine them differently as well. We can also surface and work with leadership processes, practices, and interactions. Through a debrief and role-playing interactions, a role-playing game can be used to work and practice through some of the same types of interactions that happen in other groups, and the same types of leadership processes and team development and creativity and these types of things, those types of interactions and processes that need to happen. That a group can play and be creative together actually develops its ability to play and be creative together. And those skills are also needed as leadership processes. Thirdly, working in the learner's context in their organizational problems and adaptive challenges. That by developing the capacity for collective creativity, that role-playing games, either specific narratives could be built in to work through organizational problems in a LARPing or role-playing environment, and to imagine new ways of approaching challenges and new ways of operating as an organization. And finally, working with the emotional and political dynamics of leadership in the system. Role-playing games are not immune to the emotional or political dynamics of being in a group. And through the processes of lead and steering and the facilitation of a leadership coach playing a role-playing game, and maybe even combined with leadership coaching between sessions, can help working with these dynamics of the leadership system in a slightly more removed and safer environment that actually makes them available. We'll close with some kind of key areas of interest from a roundtable that happened earlier this year about leadership and RPGs. And these are the main areas of interest: that we want to use RPGs to teach leadership skills and practice leadership and to develop leadership, both leader and leadership development, and learning about it, of course. That RPGs could also be used as a mechanism to study leadership. They are a human interaction that involves leadership processes, and so they could themselves become a mechanism for action research about leadership. RPGs can be used as community and team building exercises, as one of their core functions of role-playing games is a sense of community that goes beyond just the let's have fun together, when narratives and meaning making are involved in the group experience. And of course, RPGs are fun. Let's not forget that. And that provides an advantage for any kind of engaged learning that we're trying to do. And we're very interested, just like any other leadership workshop, with the transference of the learnings from the game to other situations. I'm very excited. This has been a small introduction about leadership development and some of the ways that RPGs are fitting for it. I'm happy to talk more, so please reach out and have fun, everybody.